Good morning, everyone, and to everyone, good morning. As was mentioned on last week, this quarter's teaching in the adult class has fallen to me. And I consider it a great honor to be here and to take part in what we do here this morning in this Bible school. Of course, the Lord our God ordained this day of the week. And while He is our audience, this gathering is for us, that we might be encouraged, as what was offered in the prayer this morning, that we might be edified, that we might be reminded the kindness that God put in place long before He created the world to redeem His most prized possession, man. See, God seemed to know without question that He was going to create this old hard-headed guy called Keith, that Keith was going to rebel against His laws. But in His infinite kindness, He prepared before He created this hard-headed guy. Bring this guy back in His favor. Therefore, showing heaven and earth His wisdom, His love and His kindness toward us. You know, He created this world on which we live. And as a result, this world is perfect for what God created it to do. And it demonstrates us the principle of all existence. It is this world that God created that provides for us. Food that we eat, the clothing, the materials we need to protect ourselves from the elements. The vines don't produce their yield for the vine. The fruit tree doesn't produce its yield for the fruit tree. The field does not produce its yield for the field. There to serve others. The basic principle of existence. So man was not created to serve himself. Man was created to serve one another. So the principle of existence is all around us. And we appreciate God for that. I believe this life is a training ground. The rules of this life are found in the Word of God. And in the final roundup of human affairs, if we've trained hard, we've worked hard, we can hope for eternal comfort with God someday. Time is no more. We've decided to study the Prison Epistles, commonly called the Prison Epistles, the book of Ephesians, the book of Philippians, and the letter to the Colossians. There are many things to be learned from these books, in particular the letter to the Ephesians. The letter to the Ephesians talks a lot about the church. The letter to the Ephesians talks about what it means to be a saint. God's expectation of us. The letter talks about Jesus Christ, the work completed at Calvary for our sakes. And it talks about the role of the church in God's plan to redeem man. So these are some very important components of the gospel. And so we've decided to take a look at them in this quarter. Now, we'll see how long this lasts. But if you can see, is that better? All right. Is that good? Now, if you notice up here, that's this section right here. From the Euphrates on the east, all the way over to the Aegean Sea, Cyprus, and the Great Sea, and the Black Sea. Today it's modern day Turkey. Today it's modern day Turkey. But in the first century and before and beyond the first century, it was called Asia Minor. You see the city of Ephesus, Colossae, you see Philippi, you see in Achaia, Corinth, and Berea, and some other Thessalonica, and you see Rome up to the far left. So why am I showing you this? Because it is important to understand with training in criminal justice technology and public safety services, which involved investigative techniques, interrogations, interviews. The main questions that need to be asked when we're looking for the truth is who, what, when, where, and why. Those areas need to be covered in order to get a clear understanding of why the writing, who wrote, to whom it was written, and etc. So you can see here, Ephesus is a coastal city, just as Corinth is a coastal city. It's a metropolitan area. And Ephesus was noticeable because it was the capital of proconsular Asia Minor. Ephesus is the capital of Asia Minor. And it was a municipality, a free municipality. What do we mean? Though it was a Roman province of Grecian inhabitants in Asia Minor, it had the power to govern its own life and existence. It was a free city, just like we are free to govern our own lives, though God is expecting us to make decisions that please Him. Certainly Rome was expecting Ephesus to make the decisions that they made please Rome and did not offend Rome. But Ephesus was a city that was fairly independent, and it had its own municipal government. It was also the center of worship of Artemis. Whose corresponding god is Diana of the Ephesians. Get ready for this. My wife said, "Are you going to show that to them?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You shouldn't show that. We're going to show you Diana." Diana was the god of fertility. How many of you knew that? Yeah, I know a lot of you would. Diana was the god of fertility, so she had breast aplenty. And she reigned, I hope nobody's offended by this. But this is going to help you understand why Paul had to write Ephesus. Because being a metropolitan city, you had people coming in from all over the world, and when they came, they brought their religions. Diana was the god, Diana of the Ephesians. Artemis was the Roman god. But they were housed in huge temples, and the temple of Diana was considered one of the 7 wonders of the world. It was huge. This image was huge. People came from all over the world to participate in Diana's fertility worship. Imagine what that was like. Yeah. That service, that temple, yes. That one. Absolutely.
And, he claims that Diana is recognized throughout the whole world. Probably you're thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the then known world. Okay, I get you.
Today, how
Yeah, right. And partly because of Paul. Yeah, you probably will. Again, I hope no one was offended. But this image, this temple, stood right at the harbor. And it was world known or renowned. So you had people coming in from all over the world wanting to participate in this sexual instinct sort of worship. Imagine that must have been pretty popular. Pretty deeply steeped. And they called it religion. You see. So it helps to open up why it was so important for Paul. I think he spent more time in Ephesus than he spent anywhere. And he made 2 trips there. But it stood at the head of the harbor. And there were special games that were conducted at Ephesus. Games, again, involving sexual instinct as it relates to this thing. I can't imagine what they could have been. But they were presided over by the Asiarchs, or the governors, and according to Acts 19 and verse number 31. Ephesus was also famous for its practice of magic. Turn to Acts 19. Let's read a few passages from there to give us a visual of what was going on at Ephesus during Paul's journey there. Acts 19, and let's look at verse 11. Anybody with it? Go ahead and read. Just read 11 and then drop down to 19. Yes. So you see the sort of thing that was going on in Ephesus that Paul was compelled to address. And he was very successful in his preaching. Not only was the practice of magic in Ephesus popular, but Exorcisms. The practice of exorcism was going on in Ephesus. There were a number of religious activities going on in Ephesus. And its position, being a harbor city, made Ephesus a great commercial emporium. People from all over the world. It was a natural port, a natural landing place. And we can also note the number of sea voyages to or from Ephesus described in the account given to us in the Acts of the Apostles. It was also a meeting place for the thought of East and West. You had a number of philosophers that would come in to Ephesus and expound whatever it is they were teaching. You had Gnostics, you had people like Cicero who came along and did his spiel regarding philosophy, different philosophies, and he gave Ephesus, a pat on the back. This was a great place to come and share with the population, even though his thoughts were clearly his thoughts and not the thoughts of God. And these kinds of things are called strongholds. And the Bible talks about strongholds, and the gospel responsibility is to tear down strongholds. So Paul had his work cut out for him, yes.
Real haven for
Do we face strongholds today? Of course we do. Of course we do. Yes. So is it new? It is not. We still, like Paul, must tear down strongholds. Because they're leading folk to destruction. Our responsibility as we have opportunity is to do that, to contend for the faith. To contend means to fight. But you never let your contention drag you down to the point where you want to lose your integrity or blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Yes. 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 And Paul tells us, I think in the Colossian letter, it opens up, it opens up by saying, those that are called to be saints. Sainthood is a calling. But what does it mean? It says to the saints and the faithful brethren and faithful brethren. Somewhere it says called to be saints. Called as saints. Okay. But anyway, the question becomes, what does it mean to be a saint? The Ephesian letter deals with that. It tells us what it means to be a saint. And we'll talk about that in the process of time. These are things we need to know that we might be able to communicate them with others. There's a lot of good people in the world. There are people trying to do the right thing. There are a lot of people, good people in the world. But if you want to be good in the sight of God, Matthew 7:21 is scary. It's scary because you're talking about people. Didn't we do all these things? We did all these things. We did every one of these things. Yet the Lord said, I never knew you. That's scary. There's a lot of good people out there doing what they're doing, believing what they're doing is right. But the question is, though you're good, we need to be good in the right place. That's what's important. And you see, Jesus used, when he said, I never knew you, ye workers of iniquity, he used the term, the strongest term the Bible uses for sin. Why? The word is iniquity. Why? Because iniquity implies premeditation. In other words, planned sin. In other words, I knew better, but I didn't do the better. So that passage says to me, these people were taught. Yet they rejected the teaching, but continued to do what they were doing, even though what they were doing was good. What makes it scary? In verse 29 of Matthew 7. Yes, sir. Did I see a hand? I'm sorry. That's her. We were in Hawaii. She was standing on the top of a volcano. Matthew 7, I think it's verse 29. It says that Jesus taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. But if you read from verse 21, it says, not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of the Father which is in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name cast out, done many wonderful works, and I will profess unto them, I never knew you, depart from me, ye that work iniquity, deliberate sin. Says to me they were taught something. Yes. Yeah. Has to do with yes. Therefore, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them, liken them to a wise man that built a house on a rock, and the rain descended, and the floods came, and the wind blew, beat upon the house, and it fell. And everyone that heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them not, and doeth them not, shall be likened to a foolish man built a house upon the sand. And the rain descended, and so on, etc. And the people said he taught as one having authority. It is Christ who has the authority in the matters of religion. And that particular passage scares me. But it's important that we, as Paul did, contend earnestly for the faith. Not to the point where we're reduced to compromising our integrity or losing control of our emotion, but setting forth the facts. You can lead a horse, but you can't make him what? Yes. Mm-hmm. Always has and always will be. Always will be. Yes, 6:44 John. The words that I speak. So Ephesus was important for us to, is important, the letter is important for us to know and to understand because of some of the very same things that we are confronted with today. Strongholds, false religions, worshiping in a manner that God knows nothing about. And Paul here was successful. His labors were successful in Ephesus. On the first and during his second missionary tour, he made such a strong impression and created such a spirit of inquiry. And that's basically what our responsibility is, to create questions in the minds of the people we talk with, because they have to come to the conclusions on their own. But we can certainly lead them as Paul did. And it gives us an idea here in Acts chapter 18, beginning at verse 19, we find these words. He says, "And he came to Ephesus and left them there, but he himself entered into the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. When they desired him to tarry a longer time with them, he consented not, but bade them farewell, saying, I must by all means keep this feast that cometh in Jerusalem, but I will return again unto you, if God will." He sailed from Ephesus. So he had a lot of success simply through the power of reason, the power of good sense. But he had pressing obligations of an apparent religious vow compelled him to depart from there, and he sailed from Ephesus. But he promised that he would return. If you talk to folk and go back and follow up. Go back and follow up. Paul gives us that example. Go back and follow up. And on your way out, tell them, write down the questions you might have, and well, next time we get together, we can talk about it. So Paul leaves us that example in terms of teaching and preaching. But who did he leave behind? He left Priscilla and Aquila, as well as Apollos, one with whom they associated. And we know the story of those three. But on the second visit, during his third journey, he stayed there at least 2 years, maybe 3, as shown to us in Acts 20, verse number 31. And once we get through this introduction, we'll move speedily through the book, because there's only about 5 or 6 sections. The book is broken down into maybe 5 or 6 sections, and we can go through it very clear, and we'll comment as we go along. In Acts 20 and verse 31, we find these words: "Therefore watch and remember that by the space of 3 years I cease not to warn everyone night and day with tears." So Paul had very strong feelings for those with whom he had to do. He had very strong feelings, and people can sense that, and that's what they need to sense when we're talking about issues such as eternity and the destiny of one's soul. People have to sense our sincerity. Preaching should be done through tears. I think, and I've seen as 52 years around the church, 27 in leadership, 19 years of preaching, I've seen how effective that is. People respond to that. Sincere, caring individuals for their souls. The Apostle Paul felt that Ephesus was the center of great influence. And it was. People from all over the world. You see why it was important for him to go to Ephesus and stay as long as he did. Because of the influence Ephesus had on Asia Minor. And there's some talk that the letter to the Ephesians did not contain the word Ephesus or Ephesians. There's right.
Circular letter.
Right. Right. So the letter to the Ephesians may not have been to the Ephesians exclusively, but to all of the churches. All of the church. Right. But it was the center of great influence and a key to Western provinces of Asia Minor. And so Paul, in writing to the city of Corinth, or the church at Corinth, when he speaks of his resolve to remain there, turn to 1 Corinthians 16. Paul recognized something here. 1 Corinthians 16, and look at verse 9. He recognized something here. And what was that? Absolutely. For a great door and effectual is open unto me, and there are many adversaries. Paul realized that the work that was there in Ephesus for him to do was massive because of the influence of the region. If he could get a foothold for Christ at Ephesus, he could evangelize the entire region. And he realized that. So I believe he spent more time there than he had any place in his journey. And the gospel seems to have spread rapidly, not only among the natives in Ephesus, but among the numerous strangers who landed at its ports and poured into its city. And particularly at the worship of Diana. People came from, kings and princes and so forth and so on came to Ephesus to worship at the feet of this huge altar, Diana. And you see why it was important for Paul to be successful here because of the vast influence. In Ephesus was visited by many illustrious men for different reasons. Ephesus had its problems in earlier times. It was pillaged by armies in succession. But at this point, when Paul was there, Paul brought a greater revolution. One which required no blood to be spilt, and at the mighty hands of God, for truth was his only weapon. But he also talked about in 1 Corinthians 15:32, it was not easy. What does it say there? That's right. He talked about, he said, if after the manner of men I have fought with wild beasts at Epistles, what advantage is it me? The dead rise not. Let us eat, drink, for tomorrow. All had about wild beasts. Paul comes along, basically says, listen, the problem for him, it would cost him his life. Again, it was the club of thought, philosophers, and mathematicians. They congregated at Ephesus, but their teaching left the city in such a spiritual bloom. In Ephesians chapter 5 and verse number 8, Paul says, for ye were sometimes darkness. And this darkness carries with it the idea of being uninformed. For light carries with it the idea of being informed or enlightened. So he says here, for ye were sometimes darkness, uninformed and misinformed. But now you are light. You have been informed and enlightened in the Lord. Walk as children of light. Philosophy and theology left the people empty. His expectation of not only but us collectively, society, letter. But while he was at Ephesus, he prosecuted his work with skill, act, message for us. Those heathen forms of worship. I hate this. I don't know what I do to make this fall apart, but it happens every time. I don't know what I do to make it fall apart, but it happens every time. The heathen forms of worship, he didn't vulgarly attack and abuse it, but the truth in Jesus was earnestly and successfully demonstrated. And it was carried, like Don said, we have strongholds even in ourselves individually. We have them on the outside, the various denominations, and we have them on the inside. And Paul deals with that in the Ephesian letter. And we'll talk about that later in the letter. We have some strongholds inside of us that we need to tear down. And he did it with tact and skill. so that when the triumph of the gospel was so soon felt that the silversmith's economy diminished, and it created a lot of problems for the preacher. So that's the bell, and that's pretty much the introduction, and that gives us some information on helping us to learn to understand the purpose, the who, what, when, where, and why, and opens up to us how results can be achieved, how we can... let me ask this. Is a name important? Is a name important? Of course it is. That's a Chevrolet, that's Wayne, that's whatever. Even this piece of land has a name. Whatever's in the county books, they call our little community is called Catalina Gardens. And it's on 58th and 12th Street. That's where we live. But yes, a name is important. A name is important. And religiously, names are important. Names meant a lot to God. Paul talks about that. We'll talk about that. What it means to be a saint. We're all called to be saints. What our role in God's expectation of us as individuals as well as a congregation of the Lord's people. He talks about that, and we'll talk more about that in the process of time. Thank you for your time and your attention.